Welcome back to another WELS 175th anniversary episode. Today we're with Professor James Danell, who teaches German at Martin Luther College, and he's going to tell us about one person in WELS history that everyone should know something about.
Good afternoon, Ben. Thanks for the opportunity to talk a little bit about significant figures in WELS history. I think one of the spiritual forefathers of our Wisconsin Synod that folks ought to know just a little bit about is our second president, Johannes Bading. And I think there are two things that really stand out to me, maybe three things that stand out to me about Bading that make him somebody we ought to know about. First of all, is just the large and long administrative leadership role that he had in our Wisconsin Synod. He came to the synod in the early 50s, and it wasn't long before he was elected synod secretary. And so that is one of the first leadership roles that he has on the synodical scene. In 1860, President Mühlhäuser decides that he's at a stage in life where he just isn't ready to serve again as the synod president. And perhaps there's a sense in his own mind that things in the Wisconsin Synod are moving in a direction other than he might personally choose. And so he is not going to stand for election again, and the synod elects Johannes Bading. By then, a known quantity. Bading was not a guy who kept his feelings to himself. That was evident already when he came to the U.S. and was ready to be ordained. It wasn't Mühlhäuser's practice that at the time of ordination, a pastor would be pledged to the Lutheran confessions. This was, though, something that Bading insisted on. This reflected his training. In Germany, he was a committed Lutheran, and at the time of his ordination, he didn't want to be licensed. He wanted to be ordained. And at his ordination, he wanted to be pledged to the Lutheran confessions. Mühlhäuser resisted. Bading insisted. And so he was pledged to the Lutheran confessions. He was also active in a part of the synod in his early years that brought him in connection with other like-minded Lutherans, people who belonged to what came to be known as the Northwestern Conference, a group of pastors that advocated for confessional Lutheran doctrine and practice and advocated strongly. So when he was elected president in 1860, he was a known quantity in the synod. People knew where he stood. And this was the man whom they elected to be their next president. He was involved in synodical leadership for a long, long time. 1860 to 1864, he was president. Then again in 1867, through 1860 or 1889. He did have a short stint in there as the vice president in 1866. And again, 1889 to 1908, he was president of the Northwestern College Board for 47 years. In addition to that, he was involved in the leadership of the Synodical Conference. So this fellowship that of which Wisconsin is a part starting in 1872, he's president of that body for 30 years. So here's a man who just for many, many years has a significant role in leading our synod. Professor Frederick, the elder Professor Frederick, says only one other time in history is there a period of generation length that can match the Bading era in terms of far-reaching importance. So I think for that reason, he deserves to be known as we look back at 175 years of history. Secondly, I would say he was critical in sending the synod in a new direction. I had mentioned already, he was part of this old Northwestern Conference. As such, he advocated for confessional Lutheran doctrine and practice. He did that along with guys like Philip Kaler, who was perhaps the most vocal in that direction. But it was something that was close to Bodding's heart. Early in his presidency, he introduced the practice of doctrinal essays being a part of synod conventions. At one of the first conventions where he was the president, he tapped another of his Northwestern Conference compatriots, Pastor Rhyme, to deliver a doctrinal essay to lay out clearly we are and we have been historically a Lutheran church body, a confessional Lutheran church body. The next year of his presidency, he saw to a reworking of the Constitution that again made clear the Wisconsin Synod is a confessional Lutheran church body. He worked to make sure that that confession that existed on paper was also put into practice. The Wisconsin Synod began straightening out a number of things. There were critical years in 1866, 67, 68, that first decade of the Bodding presidency, where the Wisconsin Synod is making some substantial changes. This all culminates at the end of 1868 when the Wisconsin Synod enters formally into a fellowship relationship with the Missouri Synod. And those who write about Wisconsin Synod church history look to Bodding as one of the key individuals in helping the Wisconsin Synod get on a firmer footing, both in doctrine as it appears on paper, but also in practice, putting off some relationships that we were involved in, the General Council, connections with the old General Synod, our connections with the mission societies in Germany. He is instrumental in helping the Wisconsin Synod navigate those changes. I think for that reason, he deserves to be known. And the third reason is the critical role he has in the worker training system of the Wisconsin Synod. I think to myself from time to time, one of our campuses somewhere really ought to have a Bodding Hall as just a nod, I suppose, to the work that he did. If you look at addresses that he has to synodical conventions early on, it seems that he is the loudest and most persistent advocate for our own worker training system. He understands if the Wisconsin Synod is to correct some things, then we're going to need to train and produce our own workers. It wasn't just a matter of, hey, we can't get enough from other sources, though that also was something that was going on. We also need to train them ourselves. He advocated for that long and hard, and in a sense, he put his money where his mouth was. After that first 4 years as president of the Synod, he is the one whom the Synod sends over to Europe to travel, I think maybe for a year and a half in Germany and among German Lutherans in Russia, collecting funds for the building of our own worker training school. He was really quite successful in that. I think if my calculations are correct, he raises in today's dollars what would be about $150,000 for bricks and mortar for putting up our school. I mentioned already for 47 years, he is the head of the Northwestern College Board, which also oversaw the seminary. The seminary is located, the worker training system is located there initially right in his backyard in Watertown. When it reopens in 1878, again, it's pretty close by there in Milwaukee, where he's now pastor at St. John's, called today on the hillside, 8th and Valete. And so I think for that reason as well, he deserves to be remembered in Wisconsin Synod history. His long presidency, his long leadership role among confessional Lutherans and in the Wisconsin Synod in particular. his important role in helping the Wisconsin Synod get on a strong doctrinal footing that it put into practice, and then his advocacy for our own strong worker training system.